The Brain and Addiction by the National Institute on Drug Abuse for Teens. The brain is made up of many parts that all work together as a team. Each of these different parts has a specific and important job to do. The cerebral cortex is the mushroom-shaped outer part of the brain. It makes up about 3/4 of the entire brain and is divided into 4 areas called lobes. Each of these lobes contains specific functions. Some areas process information from our senses, allowing us to see, hear, and taste. The front part, or the frontal lobe, is the thinking center. It empowers our ability to think, plan, solve problems, and make decisions. It is not fully developed until we reach our early 20s. The brain is a complex communication network of billions of neurons or nerve cells. Networks of neurons pass messages back and forth thousands of times a minute within the brain, spinal column, and nerves. These nerve networks control everything we feel, think, and do. Your brain contains 100 billion neurons or nerve cells that work nonstop to send and receive messages. Within a neuron, messages travel from the cell body down the axon to the axon terminals in the form of electrical impulses. From there, the message is sent to other neurons with the help of neurotransmitters. To make messages jump from one neuron to another, the neuron creates chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. The axon releases the neurotransmitters that travel across the space called the synapse to nearby neurons. Then the transmitter attaches onto the nearby neuron. This causes changes in the receiving nerve cell, and the message is delivered. Once neurotransmitters do their job, they are pulled back into their original neuron by transporters. This recycling process shuts off the signal between the neurons. Drugs are chemicals, and when someone puts these chemicals into their body, either by smoking, injecting, inhaling, or eating, they tap into the brain's communication system and tamper with the way nerve cells normally send, receive, and process information. We know there are at least 2 ways that drugs work in the brain. 1, they either imitate the brain's natural chemical messengers, or they overstimulate the reward circuit of the brain. Some drugs like marijuana and heroin have chemical structures that mimic that of neurotransmitters that naturally occur in our bodies. In fact, these drugs can fool our receptors to lock onto them and activate the nerve cell. However, they don't work the same as natural neurotransmitters do, and they end up sending abnormal messages. These abnormal messages are sent throughout the brain, which can cause problems for both our brains as well as our bodies. Other drugs, such as cocaine, cause nerve cells to release too much dopamine, or prevents the normal recycling of dopamine. This leads to exaggerated messages in the brain, causing problems with communication channels. Most drugs of abuse, nicotine, cocaine, and others, affect the brain's reward system or reward circuit. Dopamine creates feelings of pleasure. And when drugs take over, This
This system
can
may cause large amounts of dopamine to be released, and this is what causes drugs to cause that high feeling.
Repeated drug use can lead to a decrease in dopamine production, or the number of dopamine receptors that you have, which can lead to a lack of your ability to feel pleasure. When a person first starts taking a drug, they feel normal, then they feel high and it wears off and they return back to normal. But the more they start taking the drug, instead of feeling and returning to normal, they end up feeling really bad or low, and they end up needing to take the drug just to feel normal and take even more of it to feel the high they did the first time they took the drug. And of course, when it wears off, they're going to feel bad again. This is called tolerance. And building up a tolerance to a drug is your first step to becoming addicted to it. Addiction is a chronic brain disease that compulsively causes a person to seek out drugs despite the harm they cause. Risk factors for drug addiction include your genes, which sometimes we know it runs in families. It could be that you have a higher hereditary risk. Doesn't mean that you're definitely going to, but you definitely have a higher risk if you decide to use drugs. Also, your environment can play a role. If you have a parent or an older sibling who abuses drugs, this also puts you at a higher risk. And also the stage of development that you start using drugs also increases your risk greatly of becoming addicted. Research shows that the earlier a person begins to use drugs, the more likely they are to progress to substance abuse or addiction. And again, this is related to the later development of the frontal cortex. There is no cure for addiction, meaning that a person will never be able to go back and use a drug and not have a problem with it. But there is treatment, and through behavior change and certain types of medication, we can help people stay sober and not use a drug. But it's something that everyone would like to avoid, and the best way to do that is to not start to begin with, and to realize that when you make that choice to use drugs, you're running that risk of becoming addicted, and no one chooses to become addicted. It's something that chooses you.